Ethan Turner felt like a shadow. He blended into the background while his classmates laughed and socialized, preferring the comfort of his room, video games, and food. He didn't participate in school activities or dream of standing out. Public speaking terrified him. The thought of being the center of attention made his heart race. His younger sister, Lily, often teased him about his plain clothes and round face, calling him boring or shy, which only deepened his desire to retreat. His parents noticed his isolation but didn't push him too hard, assuming he would eventually grow out of it. When competitions came around, Ethan always found an excuse to skip school. But deep down, he knew he couldn't keep running forever. Something had to change. School was no easier for Ethan. Each day, he would drag himself out of bed and into his uniform, the same gray sweater and beige pants that made him feel invisible. There were times when the teacher called on him to answer a question, and his heart would race. His throat would tighten, his palms would sweat, and he would stammer out some half-formed answer, which, of course, would be followed by awkward silence. The hardest moments, though, came during school assemblies or competitions, those times when the spotlight was on the students. Ethan could feel his heart sink the moment the announcement was made. This year's annual speech contest will be held next week. Sign up with Mrs. Cooper if you're interested in participating. The thought of standing in front of an audience, speaking to dozens of eyes staring back at him, filled Ethan with dread. It wasn't that he didn't have anything to say. He had plenty of thoughts in his head, but they always got tangled up when it came time to speak them out loud. He could never find the words fast enough, and the fear of being judged, ridiculed, or misunderstood paralyzed him. So, he did what he always did. He took the easy way out. Whenever there was a competition or a public speaking event, Ethan would simply take a day off from school, citing a vague illness or some other excuse. His parents never asked too many questions. They trusted him when he said he wasn't feeling well. But deep down, Ethan knew he was running away from something important. It wasn't that he didn't want to participate, it was the fear of failing, of being humiliated in front of his classmates. That fear was his constant companion, following him around like a shadow. Ethan's little sister, Lily, didn't understand his struggle. To her, school was a place where you made friends, joined clubs, and competed in events. "Why don't you ever do anything fun, Ethan?" she would tease. "You're like a ghost, always hiding in your room. Are you afraid people will see you?" It wasn't that Lily meant to hurt him. She didn't know any better. She was just being a kid, unaware of the deep insecurities that plagued her brother. But her words stung. The teasing didn't help Ethan's already fragile self-esteem. Every time she mocked him for his clothes or how boring he was, it chipped away at his sense of worth. Lily wasn't the only one who pointed out his oddities. Ethan's classmates did, too. They would laugh at how plain his clothes were, how dull his hair seemed in comparison to the trendy cuts of the other boys. "Does your mom still pick out your clothes?" one of the boys had asked him once. Ethan had only shrugged, his cheeks burning, wishing he could vanish right then and there. Even his facial features, which to him seemed perfectly normal, had become the subject of ridicule. "Ethan, your face is so round. You look like a potato." Lily would giggle, pinching his cheeks. "Shut up, Lily," he would mumble, his face flushing with embarrassment. But deep down, it bothered him more than he let on. He wasn't like the other kids. His face was round, his hair was plain, and he didn't know how to wear his clothes with the same cool, carefree attitude that the popular kids seemed to have. One day, as the school's annual talent show drew near, Ethan decided that this time, he wouldn't shy away. For years, he had avoided any event that put him in the spotlight, especially public speaking. But this time, instead of running away, he made a decision: he would try. It wasn't about winning the talent show, it was about facing his fear of speaking in front of people, something that had always paralyzed him. Even the thought of participating in class discussions made his stomach twist in knots, but this felt like an opportunity to finally confront that fear. Ethan's journey started small. He knew he couldn't just dive into speaking in front of hundreds of students without preparation. So, he began by writing a simple speech. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a few sentences about why he was challenging himself and what he hoped to overcome. Writing it down made him realize that the words didn't have to be perfect, they just had to be his. Next, he practiced in front of the mirror. At first, He could barely get through a sentence without stumbling over his words or feeling his face flush with embarrassment. But as he repeated his speech, he started to notice improvements. His posture became straighter, his voice steadier. The mirror reflected not just his nervousness, but his growing determination. Ethan then took the next step, recording himself on his phone. The first time he played back the video, he cringed. His voice sounded weak, his words rushed, and his movements were stiff. But instead of giving up, he kept recording. Each time, he focused on something different, slowing down his pace, speaking more clearly, and trying to sound confident even when he didn't feel it. Watching himself over and over, he began to see progress. The boy on the screen wasn't the perfect speaker, but he was trying, and that was enough. After a few days of private practice, Ethan felt ready to share his speech with his family. His parents and even his little sister, Lily, gathered in the living room to listen. Despite his nerves, Ethan delivered his speech with more confidence than he'd ever expected. Miriam and Paul gave him feedback. His mom suggested he smile more, and his dad reminded him to make eye contact. Even Lily, who usually teased him, said, "You sound way better than I thought, Ethan. You got this." Hearing their support filled Ethan with a new sense of possibility. His family's encouragement reminded him that people weren't waiting for him to fail. They wanted him to succeed. Feeling empowered, he decided to practice in front of a couple of close friends, who were even more encouraging than he had imagined. They offered tips, cheered him on, and assured him that his speech was solid. The night before the talent show, Ethan sat quietly in his room, reflecting on how far he'd come. He closed his eyes and visualized himself speaking confidently on stage. Instead of focusing on his fear of messing up, he imagined the audience listening intently, nodding, and applauding at the end. His heart still raced, but he realized that this time, he wasn't running away from the challenge. He was ready to face it head-on. The next day, when the talent show began, Ethan's stomach twisted in knots as he stood backstage, waiting for his turn. He could hear the laughter and applause from the audience, and his nerves threatened to swallow him whole. But then he remembered his mother's words, and he took a deep breath. When his name was called, Ethan walked onto the stage, his knees shaking. The lights were bright, and for a moment, everything seemed overwhelming. But then, he started to speak. His voice was soft at first, but it grew stronger with each word. He spoke about his love for games, about how he often felt shy, and how he was trying to overcome his fear of speaking. The crowd was silent at first, but then something amazing happened. Ethan felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. His words, though simple, seemed to resonate with people. His classmates, who usually ignored him, were watching with rapt attention. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt seen, not for his appearance, not for his clothes or the things that made him different, but for who he truly was.